Hi, I'm Steven Messmer, and I'm an estates attorney for Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service, and I'm going to talk to you today about recording a deed for Baltimore City. So the first thing you're going to need is a deed. So you're going to need to state the consideration that you paid for the property. So that's going to include the purchase price and also any mortgage that you assumed as part of the transaction. Second thing you're going to need is you're going to need a certificate on the deed saying who drafted the deed, whether it was an attorney or one of the parties to the transaction. Third thing you're going to need is you're going to need it notarized. You're also going to want to put the property tax ID number. And then last, there's 2 affidavits you can put in the deed. And if you don't, you're going to need to provide them separately. First affidavit is certifying that the grantors are residents of Maryland, or the property that's being conveyed was their principal residence for at least 2 out of the last 5 years. The second affidavit, you're certifying that the property was not occupied by a tenant for the last 6 months. If the property was occupied in the last 6 months, you're going to need to follow a fairly complicated process by which you give the tenant the first right to buy the property if you're selling it. And you can find that in the Baltimore City Code, Article 13, Section 6, and it details exactly what your obligations are. So now that you have a deed, you may need a lien certificate. So if anyone is coming out of title, meaning that their name was on the deed as an owner, but now they're being taken off the deed as an owner, then you're going to need a lien certificate. You're going to pay $55. You're going to go to the city website, and they're going to tell you all of the charges that are due on this property. If there's any past due property taxes, water bill, any fees that have accrued on the property, maybe because there's trash or something. Anything that would operate as a lien on the property or a municipal fee, they just want to make sure they get paid when this transaction happens. So you're going to get that. It's going to be valid for 45 days. And then so you'll have that 45 days to record your deed and make sure. And before it can be recorded, you're going to need to pay off everything that's on it. So the next thing, you're going to need the Baltimore City land intake sheet. And so Baltimore City has a separate land intake sheet than the rest of Maryland. So on the land intake sheet, some of these are pretty self-explanatory. If you're paying no consideration, you're going to need to provide an affidavit stating so. So this WSBL, that's your ward, section, block, and lot. So that's going to be what makes up your property tax ID number. So fee simple means that your property is not subject to ground rent. A leasehold is a property that is subject to ground rent. So eligible for owner occupied credit. So you're going to say yes if you are promising that you're going to occupy this property for the next 7 out of 12 months as your principal residence. And if so, you're going to be eligible for some tax credits that we're going to discuss in a minute. And if so, you're going to need to provide that principal residence affidavit, which the Baltimore City Transfer and Recordation Tax Office can provide to you. The HUD 1, that's a settlement sheet. So if you have that, you're going to need, you can provide that. The transfer tax payment and recordation tax payment, we'll talk about how you can calculate that in just a minute. So the rest of that's pretty self-explanatory. So there's several taxes that you're going to have paid in order to record the deed. So the first one is the Baltimore City transfer tax, and that's essentially 1.5% of the consideration. Again, that's the amount you paid for it plus any mortgages that you assumed as part of the deal. So if it's going to be an owner-occupied residential property, meaning that you're going to occupy it for the next at least 7 out of the next 12 months, then you're going to be able to exempt the first $22,000 of consideration if the total consideration is below $250,000, and you provide that affidavit stating that it'll be your principal residence. An important exception is if you're inheriting the property, it's going to be exempt from transfer tax. Life estate deeds are also exempt, and you can pay that transfer tax to the Director of Finance, Baltimore City, Maryland. The next tax is the Baltimore City recordation tax. That's a 1% tax on consideration. Again, similar to the last tax, is for owner occupied, the first $22,000 exempt if you provide that affidavit. So again, if it's inherited, it'll be exempt from recordation tax. And so that's the case even if there's a mortgage on the property that's being assumed. Even though that's technically consideration, there's no recordation tax on it because it's being inherited. Okay, the next exception is that if the property is being transferred to someone that is related in certain ways to the grantor, the person giving the property, then the recordation tax will be exempt on any mortgage amount that's being assumed by the second party. So that list of relationships is going to be spouse or former spouse, son, daughter, stepson, stepdaughter, parent, step-parent, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, stepson-in-law, stepdaughter-in-law, parent-in-law, step-parent-in-law, brother, sister, step-brother, stepdaughter, grandchild, step-grandchild, grandparent, step-grandparent, domestic partner, or former domestic partner. So then once you've calculated the whole Baltimore City recordation tax, you can write that on a check to the Director of Finance of Baltimore City, Maryland. The second office that's going to be involved in recording this deed is going to be the Land Records Office at the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. So as long as you, when you send the packet of papers to the Baltimore City Transfer and Recordation Tax Office, as long as you have all the documents that they need at the Circuit Court and you have all the checks payable for the fees and taxes at the Circuit Court, then the Baltimore City office will automatically transfer your paperwork to the Circuit Court to be recorded. So as long as everything's in the packet, then there's nothing else for you to do after you drop it off at the Baltimore City Transfer and Recordation Tax Office. So there's several costs at the Land Records Office. So the first one is a recording fee. So that's $60 if your document is up to 9 pages. It'll be $115 if it's 10 or more, payable to the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. Second is the Maryland transfer tax. So normally that's 0.5% of consideration. But if you're a first-time homeowner, you can get a tax credit, and then it's just 0.25% of the consideration, and you need an affidavit attached to show that, and that's payable to the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. The last tax is so at the beginning we said you could put it in the deed saying that you are a resident of Maryland or it was your principal residence for 2 out of the last 5 years. If that's not true, then you're going to need to get some of the money is going to be withheld to make sure that Maryland gets paid their income tax. So that would be a tax that's going to be payable to the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. So if you've done all that, then you've done everything you need to record your deed in Baltimore City. The lien certificate normally is supposed to take just 2 weeks to get it to you, but sometimes they can get backed up and it can take as much as 4 weeks. As far as getting your deed recorded, it can take anywhere between 6 weeks and a full 3 months. And if you have any questions, make sure to reach out to the Baltimore City Transfer and Recordation Tax Office so they can answer your questions. Thanks for watching.